Hello, bonjour and welcome to your new Bonheur Private Wines video. Two things often help consumers decide which wine to buy in an ocean of tens of thousands of different brands, wineries, producers, grapes, etc. Awards or medals and wine scores given by wine magazines, wine critics and authors from around the world. The world of wine is complex and diverse, and that's what we love about it. But perhaps sometimes it is useful to simplify it and put it on a scoring scale, or to sum it up with three metals of medals. Let's see how this works today. We're looking at wine scores, how magazines and wine critics come up with scores or ratings for your vinos, how the different scales out of 100 points or out of 20 points work, and following up on our last video about how it can be useful for you to take personal wine notes when you taste your wine, here we'll also talk about how you can start scoring your own wines, yes, for yourself, or to share reviews about them with others. Let's go. My fellow wine-loving friends, Julian here. Before we get started with the video, there is something that you have to know about. This video was made possible by the Bonheur Private Wine Partnership, and the reason I work with them is not just because it's been called the most unique wine club in America, but because they truly love the wines that they choose for you. Founded by Will Bonner, the partnership is a small group of wine lovers who have come together to import excellent small batch wines that might otherwise get completely overlooked by large importers. They get them. Right now you can get your hands on three rare extreme altitude red wines from Argentina, from some of the purest, highest vineyards in the entire world, way up in the Andes Mountains. No middlemen, no additive packed supermarket wines here, no inflated cost. Plus you'll get exclusive access to more wine education videos from me, just like the one you're about to watch, to make sure you become an educated wine connoisseur. So make sure to check out the link in the video description to see if you want to become partner in something truly special in the world of wine. But for now, back to your video. Rather than talking theoretically about this, let's be practical and show you how scoring scales are laid out. Wines used to be scored more traditionally on a 20-point scale, which is used today still by British critics in particular, like Decanter magazine for example. Here is how is described the scale of famous British wine critic and author Jancis Robinson MW, or Master of Wine, one of the very most respected wine writers in the world. Wines with 20 points are described as truly exceptional. 19 points is a humdinger. 18 is a cut above superior, 17 is superior, etc. until the lower scores for deadly dull, borderline faulty or faulty wines. You may have noticed this. It is strange that a said 20-point scale actually has only 9 levels, starting at 12. But that's the way it is. My theory about this, about why this is simply because wine critics need producers to send them or make available samples to them so they can taste it. They just can't buy all the wines in the world themselves, so scores have to look at least half decent, even if the wine is very bad. So about the wine will have a score of say 12 out of 20, which kind of looks alright from the outside. It's misleading consumers, yes, I know, but that's what they do, and I'd say it's probably fair enough, because wine consumers don't want to pay a lot of money to critics to access the scores just to get their opinion and scores, so they can't independently, the critics, buy the wines at a shop and taste them and release a bunch of bad looking scores. They just can't do this. It wouldn't work. They have to make their work look positive rather than negative. That's how it is. Now, to make it look even better, the American magazines and critics started scoring wines out of 100 points. I know that's a lot of points. They started that somewhere around the mid-1980s or so. This scale was popularized by the famous Wine Spectator magazine and by Robert Parker's Wine Advocate publication that became immensely influential and popular. This scale now has pretty much become the norm internationally. The 100-point scale in theory starts at 50, with wines scored 50 to 74 described by the Wine Spectator in this instance as not recommended. 75 to 79 are mediocre, 80 to 84 are described as good, a solid, well-made wine, etc. In practice, hardly any wine ever gets scored below 80 points, unless it's very bad. So it's a 100-point scale with about 20 different levels in it, but at least there's 20 levels now, which we didn't have on a 20-point scale in reality. And that helps the scores look much better, much more inviting for any wine, right? Because all scores could look good unless you know how the scale works. An 80-point wine still looks fairly good, right? But if you know it is actually a bad wine. That's how it works. And what happens here even more is that because all scores look good, producers will advertise those scores more to their consumers, therefore promoting the publication. They'll say, we just have an 88-point score for this wine by the Wine Spectator, quoting the Wine Spectator and therefore promoting the magazine doing so, which of course the Wine Spectator loves and wants. And that's how the 100-point scale wins and won over the 20-point scale, because it looks better. It's free promo for the magazines and critics, while a winery would never advertise, publicize a 42 out of 100-point score for this wine. 88 just looks better. Everyone would lose with a more transparent scale, at least everyone in the wine industry. The consumer would perhaps benefit, but that's another story we won't know. So this is how wine scores work. It is a little silly and it's frankly a little hard to explain why it is like this. This is just my humble understanding and humble interpretation of this system. But at least now you know. And on top of what we've just discussed, of course, wine scores are subjective. There is no literal wine scoring machine, it just doesn't exist. And it's usually just one individual tasting a wine, giving or writing down an opinion and scoring it. And people have ups and downs depending on whether they had a good day, they're having a good day, they had a good night, whatever. They have their own skills, they have their own taste, they have their own personal preferences as well. That's how famously Robert Parker loved very big, bold, rich, very fruity, very oaky wines. So he used to score big oaky wines higher, which influenced all producers all around the world towards making bigger, richer wines, in particular all over the years 2000s. Now, modern wine critics generally look a little deeper into the wines, not only how rich and oaky they are, they look at the balance, the complexity, whether it's a typical wine for the grape it is made from or representative of the region it comes from, which allows for more variety to flourish in the world of wine today, which is a good thing for us consumers. Yes, just to be aware that no critic is perfect and absolute. They'll taste a wine, think about it for a minute, then give it a score. That's all it takes. Wine critics generally taste thousands of wines a year, hundreds of wines at a time. When a wine critic visits a region, he comes to France, in the corner of France, he or she would generally be presented with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 wines maybe, and they would taste them all over just a few days, if that. 1 minute or two, maybe for each wine, that's all they have. So take those scores with a pinch of salt. I personally do score wines as well for my blog and for myself, but I also like to go as you know, a little deeper into a wine, writing longer tasting notes than most renowned critics, or making videos like the ones that you know, talking about what a wine tastes like for at least a few minutes. I think the wines deserve it. I think the vines deserve it. I think the winemakers deserve it. That's probably because I was a winemaker and I know how much hard work is involved, and I think you deserve it. That's how I see it anyways. But here's also why I like to score wine, if only for myself, and why you might want to consider scoring wines yourself as well. And maybe with our last video where I talked about how and why you could consider writing your own notes about the wines that you taste, maybe I've convinced you a little bit to start having your little tasting booklet to record your tastings. I also want to elaborate and add that you may want to score wines as well at the same time while you're writing down your notes. And why not? I know it may sound a little silly and perhaps pretentious to score wines. Everyone out there says that scores are meaningless, and more so. And they are to a certain extent, as we've just discussed here, in the sense that those scores are personal. A critic would perhaps score a wine a 93 out of 100 points and another wine a 94, 95 out of 100 points, which doesn't actually mean one wine is absolutely in absolute better than the other. It just means for that particular individual, not for you, for that individual, his or her personal preference goes toward that wine or that other wine. And I guess that's the exact point I want to make here. If you start scoring wines yourself, it'll help you hierarchize and remember your personal preferences better. If you write notes about, say, 2 different wines, Napa Valley Cabernets, for example, at 2 different dates and occasions, one visiting a winery and another time tasting a wine with friends. When you get back to your notes, trying to make sense of all of the different aromas and flavors and tannins and colors that you wrote down like we discussed, it won't necessarily help you decide which of these 2 wines you should practically order or buy a case of. And that's when scores may come in handy. If you have a 92 score and a 95 score for those 2 wines, you'll in an instant know which one you actually liked best, even if it was a long time ago. Especially as you score wines more and more often and get better at it, more consistent, you acquire a bit of a methodology to do it better. So I'd say scoring wines for yourself is useful, and it can be very useful to others as well if you share those scores on wine websites or wine review mobile applications, for example. Also, once, and that's going to be my conclusion, very important, once you start scoring wine yourself is really when you start understanding how wine critics do it. That's how I know how they do it, because I've been scoring wine myself for quite a while. They do it, the critics, they score subjectively because they have to, because they are subjective people. And that's when you realize it's not actually a bad thing. It's just what it is, it's imperfect, but it's you, it's them, and that's all it is. Subjective, that's what wine is as well. And I'll leave it here for today. I hope this all made a little sense and clarified a few things for you around wine scores. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon in the wonderful world of wine. Au revoir.